Hi, everybody. Welcome to another issue of the Worldview. Worldview with Chris Greco. I'm your host. For the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about different countries that may have made the news, maybe internationally, but didn't quite hit the standard that we have here in the United States to actually bring up things that make a difference in the world, right? So, I mean, we're so concerned with our little, I don't know what you call it. It's an interesting display of just inner implosions, I guess, within the United States. And when we sit back and we go, yeah, we're all alone here, US is, we're not all alone, folks. 193, 194 countries out there, and they all have problems. They all have issues. And most of them affect us in the United States. So that's why I bring this stuff up. And that's why I gather data. And a lot of people, again, and I say this just about every show, but everyone sits there and says, "Chris, this is really nice. You get a worldview, but really, you talk about data and statistics in different areas, and I talk about that on the data show. But in order to make a show like this, you have to have research. You have to gather data. It's not just listening to the news and then writing down what they say. It's going out there and finding out what, the depth aspect. What are they talking about? Where is it located? And how does it affect us? And that's really what we're talking about, the what, where, and how it affects us in the United States. So, without further ado, we're going to hit the B's today. Bolivia, Brazil, and Belgium all hitting the news internationally. And what I do is I listen to haystack news, and I listen to this haystack news. It really is. And I go to the international. I don't even care about local stuff. I don't care about it. Whatever happens, happens. I'm going to get it on local news whenever I watch it, or whatever, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever it is. International is where I go, because that's where they talk about. That's where you get Al Jazeera. That's where you get France 24. That's where you get Deutsches, the DB News. That's where you get all these different types of news media outlets that are located in countries in Europe and Asia, and that's where you find out what the local aspect is, what they talk about when they talk about these areas. And it really hit me hard, especially the one about Bolivia, which we're going to talk about right now. So that's the one we're going to talk about. So let's talk about Bolivia. So Bolivia, there's some lake problems here, and Lake Pupo. And no, it isn't Lake Poo-Poo, it's Lake Pupo. And basically, it's completely empty. It's completely dry. I mean, this I don't think I've ever seen a lake totally and completely dry, but it is dry. And basically a 20-year drought, and it's not really a 20-year drought as much as it's just been uneven rainfall, and along with other areas, right? And it's funny because they say, oh, it's supposed to fill up about every 50 years, and this is what it does, and all these things. But basically, this is not about climate change. And it's interesting because a lot of people will automatically say, well, it's climate change. And climate change is the reason that all this happens. But there are other issues that are causing this lake to become completely depleted. And that's what we'll talk about that. And NASA's tracked the lake depth for several years, and they've done that sometimes through the International Space Station, through other areas, and it's really fantastic. I mean, what they do is just amazing, anyways. And that's why they're what is the number one best places to work in the federal government. I mean, and I've dealt with NASA when I was in the federal government. And they are just unbelievably good at what they do. So basically, you can actually go to that site, the Earth Observatory.nasa.gov, and you can see the photos. So, lake's dried up. What does it mean? Well, the media would have you believe that this lake is some deep lake, but really it's not. It's only 9 feet deep. I mean, at its deepest, 9 feet is not a deep lake. And if no matter how big it is, 7 kilometers or whatever it is, it's a problem, because basically you only have so much depth. You start depleting that water. That water gets depleted awfully quick. The area is also plagued with varying precipitation levels, which can immensely affect this lake area, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So some other issues. And before we go on, I think it's important. Let's see what we're talking about here. So this is South America right here. And right along here, if you can see a look, take a look at this. This is a very rocky area here, right? This is this is Chile, goes along here, right along this area here, and right next to it is Bolivia. And so we can actually see this lake at its fullest actually. So this is Lake Pupo right here. That's Lake Pupo. In fact, you come up and you see it, Lake Pupo. So that's what you have here. And then you can see that there are some feeders that come down through there, including now. Understand, people take a look. It's like, oh, it's a big deal. It's 11,000 feet in the air. It's this thing is 11,000 feet elevation right here. I mean, it's in basically a mountain lake, is what it is. So it's very dry when you get down to that, and then you have it fed by Lake Titicaca, which is here. What happens is, and it's funny because this is interestingly, this is Copacabana right here, Copacabana, which I thought was interesting. Anyways, so Lake Titicaca is here, feeds through what they call the Desaguadero Desaguadero River, which flows through here all the way down through here, all the way down through here. Was it all the way down into Lake Pupo? So what's happening? Well, we'll talk about that. But I wanted to make sure you know what geography was on this thing, and the fact that here's Bolivia and here's Chile right here. So let's talk about this now. So it has a high elevation, about 11,000 feet, makes it very dry, and people sit back and they go, so dry air, yes, dry air. That's basically less oxygen in the air, and it makes it very dry. Because you have to have oxygen and hydrogen to be able to make condensation. Well, if you don't have a lot of oxygen, then you don't get that condensation, so you don't get the humidity. So it's going to be dry air. So the runoff from another lake, I talked about that, Lake Titicaca, is by way of a river, very muddy, and because it's muddy and because it goes through salt flats, it actually is. Lake Pupo is one of the largest salt water lakes, which is a haven to some migratory birds, including flamingos, which I didn't realize. So basically, by this lake drying up, now all of a sudden the migratory birds, they're gone. So now and the people in the media outlets that I listen to, they were talking about how they used to have a lot of stuff to eat. They used to be able to go out and they used to fish. They used to do all these things. Now they can't do that. They can't find things to eat. So it's because they used to eat the birds, right? I mean, they had a lot of food available to them, and now they're having problems because of that. So we'll talk about that in a second. The river that feeds the lake, remember that the Saguadero River has been diverted for irrigation, and according to some media reports, residential growth. So, I mean, Bolivia is the main producer of quinoa, along with human activity, urban growth, and water diversion from mining and agriculture, right? According to Science Times. So Science Times, they have this article. So that's the oops, sorry. That's the site that you would go to if you wanted to learn more about this. And if you want to learn more about ResearchGate, I'm about to show you an illustration from that. The rainfall for 50 years between 40 years, excuse me, between 1960 and 2001. Gosh darn, I mean, I have a big problem with math, with arithmetic. I'm sorry, I apologize. So it's 40 years between 1960 and 2001. Seems to average around 300 millimeters or more. So you sit back and you go, well, that's great, Chris, but what's a millimeter, right? So you sit back and you say, all right, so I realize this, millimeters is tough because you sit back and you think, what is a millimeter in relationship to inches? Well, the problem is you need about um, it's 0.03 inches, almost 0.04 inches. Very, very small, right? 300 millimeters. If you took 300 millimeters, and I can actually do this for you, is if the and we'll just do it right here. If the millimeter is 300 is 0.03, right? So 0.04 inches, right? And then times 300. So basically 12 inches. So basically you're getting about 12 inches of water, uh, average about 12 inches of water a year. Okay. That's 1 inch a month. That's not that much. That's not that much. And I think this is very, very important to understand is that, when you talk about millimeters and you say 300 millimeters, wow, that's so much. Really, it's not. It's only about a foot of water, a foot of rain a year. So that's not that much. The river has been diverted. Okay, so we talked about that. And we talked about this area. So those are the sites you need to have. Now, this is where we just talked about Lake Pupo, right? And whoa, sorry about that. Let me see. There we go. So this is Lake Titicaca, goes through the Desaguadero River, and then it goes to Uru Lake, and then to Pupo Lake in this area. And if this river becomes in the least bit, uh, you try to divert it. Basically, these two lakes are just going to go. They're going to go dry because they just don't have the rainfall it needs to be able to do what needs to get done. So, I mean, and this is the reference down here for that. So let's talk about who does it affect. What and who's it affect? The local population around the lake used to fish, but they can't anymore. So basically, they're going to attain money through crafts. So they're trying some arts and crafts things. The men are going to work in the mines, and we'll talk about those mines in a second. The main mining has been lithium. Great demand. As a matter of fact, I've heard it called white gold. Lithium is white gold. I mean, we're talking a lot of money per ton per British ton, TONNES, right? And the Guardian put out there's your site here for the Guardian, and you can talk about lithium mining. So basically, what happens is, from reading this and from doing a little bit of research, lithium is also in salt mine. It's also in the salt area, and basically, what happens is you try to remove the lithium from the salt, from the salt lining, whatever you want to call it, and basically, it takes water. You need to have water to do that. Now, the mines are located in the salt flats, which also feeds the lake in question. So there you have your diversion thing, right, or the mining aspect. Who's trying to get on this? Well, China. They have a battery producer called CATL, and they are trying to get into Bolivia to produce lithium to be able to produce batteries. Bolivia could begin exporting electric batteries by 2025, maybe, according to that article the Guardian article. So this is something that is really, really important, and I keep trying to tell my audience, this is that a lot of these countries have raw minerals that are very, very important to the technology we have. And I love people talking about, we need to get rid of oil. We need to get rid of coal. We need to get rid, and I sit back and I go, well, that's fine, but the problem is that you can't produce steel. You can't produce aluminum. You have to have 1500 degrees Fahrenheit just to try to produce aluminum. You can't do that through wind power or solar power. The only two things you can do that is going to be fossil fuels and nuclear power. That's the only ones that are going to generate that type of heat. And basically what happens is that when you start to relegate that stuff and just saying we're not going to do that, that's fine. Other countries are going to do that, and they're just going to produce the same amount of pollution that we would do if we were to industrialize that. So Bolivia is about to step into manufacturing and industrialization very, very quickly. And because of that, you're going to get the lakes and all the other things that go along with that. and they're going to start to suffer because of that industrialization. Which I get it. Progress is it's unstoppable. It works, but it's something that has also you have to have sacrifices to do it. Oops, I think that's it. So that's it with that. So now let's go to Brazil. Brazil, interestingly, Lula da Silva, the new basically president prime minister of Brazil, has gone out to has approached China, and I mean has gone to Beijing and has kissed the ring of Xi Jinping, the whole nine yards, and then he went to Portugal. Now, why would he go to Portugal? Why Portugal to begin that? Well, first of all, Brazil was originally a colony of Portugal, right? They were given their independence in 1822, and Brazil's main language is Portuguese. So, what a perfect way to start out the European kind of reach out than to go to the country that you have a very similar language with. However, interestingly enough, Lula's kind of perturbed the Europeans, specifically European Union, by stating that the Westerners, U.S. and the Westerners, should stop shipping weapons and enabling Ukraine to battle Russia, because basically it's stimulating the war. And that's, evidently did not sit well with European leaders, which I can only imagine. So, and at one point he stated that maybe Ukraine should cede Crimea, to Russia, even though Russia seized it in 2014. Ukraine actually is making headway on getting it back, which I thought is kind of cool. So basically, what's happening is that Lula is not in the best, and he's trying to talk these things back now. He's saying, well, nobody should invade another person's sovereignty. It's like, okay, fine. So he's trying to backtrack his words, but it's going to be very difficult for him to do so, I think. So what and who does this affect? Well, Brazil is part of BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, also, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China is reaching out to different countries, and BRICS is starting to be part of that area. So it's interesting how India, who's supposed to be basically an ally of the United States, is in cahoots with a very, everyone calls them the axis of evil. But I'll tell you, it's interesting how China is trying to get into the infrastructure of other countries, including Bolivia, what I just talked about with this battery thing. So, I mean, they're trying to get in there to try to make headway to to countries that want to become industrialized, so they can start putting their nose in their business. Basically, is what's happening. So China's firmly in charge of the BRICS organization, although seemingly outward it's multilateral. I think it's a bunch of horse poop. I think China's basically in charge. Russia is second. They're kind of hanging in there, but basically China's in charge of it. Brazil wants to step into the European arena in order to get more support for their countries, specifically in areas such as space agencies. So Brazil and Portugal, they want to get into the space programs. So I thought that's very interesting, especially since Brazil is very big on Amazon rainforest, areas of that they really want to make that work. Brazil also wants to consolidate a group of nations, including them and China, to mediate a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine-Russia war. I thought that's very, very interesting how they're doing. I mean, so basically they're trying to make headway to try to make that work so that they can go ahead and say that they actually mediated that. I thought that's very interesting. And he has walked back comments about the war, and I just went over that. So that's basically what's going on there. Finally, Belgium, France, and their wind farms, and which is also very interesting. So basically, it goes something like this. So we're gonna go all the way. We're gonna go over here. We're gonna go. Oh, by the way, this is Brazil, folks. This is Brazil. Look at the size of this thing. I mean, this thing is huge, right? And then you take a look. We're gonna go over here to Portugal and take a look at Portugal. Here's Portugal. Whoop, small, right? There's Portugal. Very small, but remember, and I think this is very important, is that Portugal was a very, very, very strong sea power. In the 1400s, 13, 1400s, even the 1500s. Although the Spanish Armada was 1588, and they pretty much they went down the tubes. England took over as the foremost uh, sea power with their small little ships, but they did a good job. Okay, so here we go, France and Belgium, right? So let's take a look at France and Belgium. So here's the coastline of Belgium right here. Very small. In fact, let's figure this thing out. So we're just gonna just punch across there, and it is about 36 miles. 36 miles. That's what we got. So let's take a look at France's. So France's coastline is 357 miles. Okay, so 10 times the amount of Belgium. Well, right off the coast of Belgium, let's see if I can actually point out here. So Dunkirk is here. What the French want to do is they want to put, and we're gonna go kilometers here. So they want to put, uh, we're gonna just go 10 kilometers out. What are we doing here? 10 kilometers. So that's about 10 kilometers right there. 10 kilometers from Dunkirk, the French want to build wind farms. And the people in Belgium said, "Hey, come on, we got villages here. We got here it's beautiful, and you're going to see a bunch of wind farms. So can't you just extend them out instead of 10 kilometers? Can you extend it out to 17 kilometers? Now, again, here's 17 kilometers. So it's 17 kilometers right there. So I mean, if you take a look at this, 17 versus 10, that's what they want. The French are basically saying, I don't think so. That's our coastline. We can do pretty much what we want. Again, look at all this coastline. Look at this. I mean, you're telling me, and they are putting wind farms up along the coastline, but the thing is, and in some towns and whatever else they have along these areas, but they have all these areas. Why pick Dunkirk? Well, there's a couple reasons why. First of all, this is the North Sea up in here. And the British, the Scandinavians, all these areas in here, they want to put in wind farms to the North Sea development area. They want to put pipelines in. They want to put different areas in. Why do they want to do that? They want to do it so that they can basically poke, poke an eye of Russia and just say, guess what? We don't need your stuff. We don't need your oil. We don't need your gas. We don't need jack from you. We're just gonna make that work. So that's it's interesting. Oh, so more on here if you want to do that. And Belgium, as I said, going to challenge French in court, trying to make those 17 rather than 10 kilometers. So about twice the distance, And French are saying, nah. For North Sea development, we are trying to rely on renewables rather than Russian oil and gas, which I agree. All this time I've been busting the French, and because I think that they're selfish, which it's going to take a lot for me to think otherwise. But basically, they're part of that North Sea development area, and the French are going to make out very well on that, and the British are going to make out very well on that. Everyone's going to make out very well in that area, trying to get power in there. Again, you cannot manufacture just about anything with wind power, and you can't manufacture with solar. You can't. You have to have coal, you have to have oil, you have to have nuclear in order to produce those things that make things like this shirt and this tie, this plastic stuff. When you talk about this area, you got to be able to manufacture. When you manufacture, you got to be able to have the ability, the fuel to be able to do that. So that pretty much does it. I mean, so the bottom line is this, is that when we talk about these areas, when we talk about France and all these areas, it's very important for you to understand, when we talk about that, why we talk about that. So, and this is where it gets very important, is to understand where everything is, the North Sea. Netherlands, Belgium. A lot of people don't even know where Luxembourg is. Here's Luxembourg right here, folks. A lot of people confuse Netherlands with Denmark. There's Denmark. Here's Netherlands. Okay, and Germany is right there. And of course, Germany now is all one country. Was originally east and west. I mean, you have all these things. You have to take into consideration of that. France, right? A lot of coastline, and it's interesting because I didn't even count this coastline. Hold on, wait a minute. I got to count this coastline. Wait a minute. So I'm talking here. What I say, 300. Let's see, 591 kilometers, and another. Well, let's talk about miles here. 591, 369. That's 800. I mean, we're talking a ton of. I mean, there's like 1,300 kilometers worth of you know of coastline here. So I mean, it's a lot of coastline, But again, they want it near that North Sea, right? There's a North Sea development here. They want that wind farm up here near the North Sea, so they can say, "Oh, we're part of the North Sea development." So I may be, look, I'm conjecturing here. I'm not saying they're doing it just to be part of the North Sea area, but why not? Because if they do that, then all of a sudden they become part of the North Sea development area, then they're going to be able to benefit from that too. So that's where Belgium is going to. Belgium can scream all they want, but basically that's French waters. That's going to be interesting how that's all going to work. Although they might be considered to be in international waters, but off their coastline. Yeah, interesting, right? So all these areas, and a lot of people sit there and they go, I'm talking to somebody the other day about Ireland. Somebody says, "Was United Kingdom part of Europe?" Well, you have continental Europe, and then you have Europe. So I think that's very important to understand. Continental Europe is all this area, right? We consider it to be, in fact, at one point, this whole area was Eastern Europe, right? But I mean, this is all continental Europe. Yeah, I mean, this is actually Scandinavia. Then you have this island, right? Island kingdom, whatever we're going to call it. And all of a sudden, you have Ireland and United Kingdom right in this area. So I think it's very important. You have Northern Ireland here, so I think that's very important to understand how all this exists and how it exists within the European community. Sometimes I think we sit back and say, "Oh, we're nice and cozy here in the United States," and we are. When you really want to think about it, you can sit back and say, "Yeah, we are kind of cozy in the United States because we can afford to be. We're isolated. We have ocean this side, ocean this side. What more could we want?" So that's what's going on there. And I think whenever people talk about Bolivia and then I remember at one point they were talking about Bolivia and Brazil. And I said, okay, it's South America. Then somebody brought up Central America, Central American country, and said, we're talking about South America. I said, no, that's not a South American country. That's a Central American country. So sorry, but those are two different areas. And they need to be treated differently from their resources, what they do, all these things, how close proximity to the United States, the different aspects. So that pretty much does it, folks. I appreciate you listening today, and hopefully you got something from the three topics we talked about, Bolivia, Brazil, and Belgium, and hopefully you just understand a little bit more about how that all works with the news and what exactly it does. And I will tell you, no matter what you do, other parts of the world are going to affect us. I mean, the lithium in Bolivia, that's going to definitely affect us from how we conduct, because we're not talking about just batteries for cell phones. We're talking about batteries for cars. Big deal, especially with going into electric cars and electric aspects. That's a big deal for us. So until next time, this is Chris Greco, your host for Worldview, signing off, saying always remember, there's our view, and then there's the worldview.